Over 25 years ago, on September 29th, 1998, we watched a brainy girl with curly hair drop everything to follow a guy she only kind of knew all the way to college. And so began Felicity. My name is Juliette Littman, and I'm a Felicity superfan. Join me, Amanda Foreman, who you may know better as Megan, the roommate, and Greg Grunberg, who you may also know as Sean Blunberg, as the three of us revisit our favorite moments from the show and talk to the people who helped shape it. Listen to Dear Felicity on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This podcast brought to you by Ring. With Ring cameras, you can check on your pets to catch them in the act.
Izzy, drop that.
Or just keep them company.
Aw, I'll be home soon.
Make sure they're okay while you're away. With Ring. Learn more at ring.com/pets.
Earlier this month, the actress Sydney Sweeney started promoting a crypto meme coin on her Twitter account. It was called Sweeney. And there was a post saying, "Stay tuned to see what Sweeney can do."
As you might be able to guess, that wasn't really Sydney Sweeney promoting that coin.
Shocker.
Exactly.
That's Joseph Cox, an investigative reporter and co-founder of 404 Media. Joseph covers hackers and the shadowy corners of the internet. Sydney Sweeney had, of course, been hacked. But it was more complex than just your standard social media hack.
They had actually taken over her Verizon phone number as well, which is what granted them access to the Twitter account. And the reason I know this is because I spend a lot of time in these online chat rooms where hackers gather, and several people actually posted this photo of an iPhone laying on the trunk of a Mercedes, along with some sort of receipt or invoice from Verizon. And in big capital letters, it said, "Thank you for your purchase, Sydney Sweeney." That was immediately suspicious. I don't think Sydney Sweeney was going to be posting, let alone a tweet promoting a cryptocurrency, but also some sort of receipt in the criminal chat room. And that led me down the rabbit hole of, it looks like these hackers actually took over her phone number as well.
How does a hacker do something like that? Take over someone's phone number?
So the practice is called SIM swapping, or SIM porting, or SIM hijacking. I usually say SIM swapping. And basically what that entails is a hacker somehow tricking a telecom, be that Verizon, AT&T, or T-Mobile, into handing over control of the phone number to the hackers. And then that way, they can receive the phone calls, they can receive the text messages, including any password reset text messages, or, crucially, two-factor authentication codes.
And then, of course, the hackers are off and running. Telecom companies, which are vast and global, are particularly juicy targets.
Hackers I've reported on have broken into the networks of these telecommunication companies, installed malware, so then they can remotely use the tools that Verizon, for example, uses itself.
Then, 2 weeks ago, AT&T revealed that nearly all its wireless customers, more than 100 million people, had their call and text data breached. It's one of the worst hacks in history. So, today on the show, why are phone companies so vulnerable to cyber attacks? And is there any way to protect yourself? I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia. Identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Joseph is one of the best tech reporters in the world, particularly when it comes to data security and telecom networks. And that has led him to a lifestyle that is a little bit extreme.
I do not own a mobile phone that I use for my own communications. For years, I used an iPod Touch, so basically an iPhone without the phone part. It was a Wi-Fi only device, which allowed you to download chat apps like Signal or Wickr or whatever. I can check email on it, but crucially, it's only on Wi-Fi networks. So if I'm walking between one network to another, well, sorry to whoever's trying to get hold of me. You're not going to be able to until I get there. Apple actually stopped providing all of the operating system and security updates for iPod Touches. So I had to move to an iPad mini now. So now I have to carry an iPad around with me, which means I have to buy a very particular assortment of jackets which have the correct pocket sizes. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. Don't get me wrong. It's extreme.
Wait, why? Tell me why you do this.
I simply do not trust the world's telecommunications companies to keep our data secure. I do not trust them to protect data at rest, which could be the information you provide to them, such as your name, your email address, your billing information. I do not trust them to protect the actual sort of used data on the network, so your call records or your text records or anything like that. And I absolutely don't trust them to protect your location data, because I've previously reported that, at least in the US, bounty hunters could buy the current or very, very recent location of nearly any phone in the United States for a few $100s. It's just time and time again, whenever I inch closer to potentially getting a mobile phone, something will happen and it will scare me off again. I'll be like, oh no, I'm right. I'm not gonna buy a phone. And it's just for a series of security incidents and their general posture on security when they are maintaining these networks, which are decades upon decades old. And I just don't think they do a very good job of it at all.
The backbone of our telecom network is known as SS7. It's the network used when you're roaming. Basically, what allows you to seamlessly move from one network to another. But the SS7 infrastructure wasn't designed to authenticate who was sending messages on the network. And for a while, that was fine. There weren't any problems.
But as more hackers and more governments and more surveillance vendors got wind of this, they joined SS7 and they could spy on the location of people and intercept text messages and phone calls as well. So what I'm saying is, at least in that way, it was not secure from the start. And there have been plans and various measures put in place to improve the security. But I just think fundamentally, telecommunications companies and networks are simply not designed securely, and they do not have security in mind the same way that, a Silicon Valley tech company might. For all of their faults, for all of the faults of Silicon Valley, Google has pretty damn good security.
You've done some reporting on SS7, and the idea that was revealed in one of your pieces that attackers have repeatedly tracked people, the physical location of people inside the United States on this, what do we call it? Infrastructure, network? Should I worry about this as just a regular old person?
So in the case of those US examples, it seems they were targeted individuals, as in this wasn't some sort of broad attack against the US population writ large. There was some reason that these people were under surveillance, at least in that case. So unless you're I'm speculating a little bit, but unless you're a journalist or a political dissident who's hiding out in the US, maybe you don't need to worry about that. But that being said, something which I almost forget about because I reported it so long ago and sort of nobody else has followed up, and I really need to get back on it as well, is that its criminals also have access to SS7. In Europe and in the UK especially, criminals have used SS7 to intercept text messages to then break into bank accounts. So it's not just governments, it's not just surveillance vendors in there. It is financially motivated criminals as well. And if you have a bank account, I would be pretty worried about that.
One of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is this major hack at AT&T. It made a lot of headlines. Just a few weeks ago, the company said that nearly all of their call records had been stolen. What does that mean in everyday language?
I think this is one of the most significant data breaches in recent history, and I also think it's the most significant telecom breach specifically. So AT&T came out with this announcement. It actually emailed a few select journalists the day before and put in place a very unusual embargo, which said, hey, Joseph, we have this news. We'll share it with you after markets close, which I've never heard.
Which is always a heads up that something major happened.
Exactly. I mean, I'm a security journalist, a hacking journalist. I'm not really a business journalist, so I personally had not heard that before, and it obviously piqued my interest. They then tell me under embargo, and I think half a dozen or so other journalists, that yes, hackers managed to get away with, quote, nearly all of their call and text records. Now, AT&T stressed, and they would love that I'm stressing this, that it's not the content of the communications. It is more, well, this number sent a text message to this number received a call from this other phone number. But that's not much better at all. That is your metadata. That is the data about the data, and it can really show your entire social graph. I mean, I remember back in 2013 with the Edward Snowden revelations, so much of that was specifically about metadata because the NSA found it so useful. Whereas back then, it was a capability for the NSA. Well, surprise, some random hackers now have it for nearly all of AT&T's customers.
Including me, I guess. My brother and I were actually texting earlier today, and he shared a very funny screen grab, I mean, funny in a dark way, from AT&T's virtual assistant saying, if you are contacting us about the July data news, please know the data involved does not include your personal or passcode information. I just phrasing it as the data news instead of this absolutely massive attack feels like it downplays what happened.
I would absolutely agree with that. Again, I think this is massively significant. And I've actually seen some of the data myself. Somebody sent me a selection of numbers that were looked up in the data, and you can immediately tell how sensitive it is. There are apparent family members in there. What the hacker had done was they took the phone numbers and then used online tools to look up who was the owner of each of those numbers. Now, they may not always be accurate because it's an automated tool, but I could quickly see, well, this person seems to be calling a family member. Here, they're calling a business. Here, they're communicating somehow with some sort of professional organization they're connected to. Like, I don't know who this person was. I've never met them before. But looking at their metadata for 6 seconds, I could work out a hell of a lot about them.
On the one hand, listening to you recount this, you get the sense of how intimate the details are and how broad the scope is. But on the other, even as a relatively sophisticated phone user, I think, and someone who understands this universe a little bit, I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, like, oh, great, I was involved in that. Like, here goes another one. And I wonder if there's any way to get past that feeling, because I think the general public, has no expectation of privacy anymore.
Yeah, we absolutely have data breach fatigue, maybe privacy violation fatigue, and I totally understand it can be so overwhelming that, oh my God, there was this data breach, then this one. Well, what's the point? I might as well give up. What I would encourage people to do is just try and take back a little bit of your privacy and see how it goes. Maybe go use a service that says it can delete some of your data from various websites. Try that, see how easy or not easy it was, and then make a decision about whether you want to do a little bit more. The idea that privacy is dead, it's a myth. It's not dead. It's just you do have to sometimes put in some work for it, and you have to know what you want to target.
When we come back, why are big telecom companies so much worse at this than anybody else? Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cashback earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
There are so many big companies that handle data. Credit card companies, banks, Silicon Valley companies, social media companies. Why are telecom companies seemingly particularly bad at this?
I really think it does come down to their age. They have been around for so long that they haven't really had to improve their security necessarily. They are, quite literally a piece of critical infrastructure. And there's also, of course, the very, the monopoly aspect of a lot of these companies. They're not true monopolies in the US. There is some competition. There's not much, though. It's just a few different telecoms who are handling basically everybody's data. The same is very true in the UK as well. And there just isn't much competition because in the very way that telecommunications networks function, where you have physical infrastructure that's being built up around countries and around the world, that can't just be replaced. It can only be built upon, it can only be improved, but you still need to have the incentive for these companies to even do that. I mean, I feel that they were not only necessarily negligent, but they've got complacent when it comes to security.
Yeah, I'm thinking about an incident when Verizon, I believe, gave someone's stalker their personal information. I mean, it just doesn't feel like the consequences are there to disincentivize telecoms from acting the way they've been acting.
Yeah, in that case, somebody pretended to be a sheriff and posed as that law enforcement officer, contacted Verizon and said, I need the location or the data associated with this phone number. And Verizon handed it over. And then that person drove armed with a knife to the address on file. This is not some abstract problem. I understand it could be abstract because it feels like it's happening out there. It feels like you can't really touch it or see it, but the real world consequences of this are very, very real when you're dealing with stalkers or harassers or whoever it may be as well. And with the AT&T breach, I mean, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has said it's investigating. The FCC has actually issued fines against the telecoms when I reported on the sale of location data. I think they did fines of around $400 million. So the fines do happen. That being said, I don't think $400 million is all that much for these telecoms. It needs to be billions with a B, not millions with an M.
I mean, the FCC oversees so much. They do spectrum auctions. They look at mergers. There's all sorts of stuff on their plate. How seriously do they take the security aspect of telecom providers?
I think they do take it seriously. They have been communicating a lot more about SIM swapping, that issue that impacted Sydney Sweeney, and they have issued fines against location data tracking. It's just that they move so slowly. And now I don't have much insight into the inner machinations of the FCC. I don't know whether that's a bureaucracy thing or whatever it may be. So I do think they do take it seriously. It's just that their actions appear half a decade later or something. So, well, we've moved on to the next telecommunications issue now because they keep cropping up. So I don't even know when there could be enforcement on the AT&T breach, if at all. That being said, I do think they're going to do something. I just don't think it's going to be tomorrow.
Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon has been calling for the FCC to impose basically mandatory minimum cybersecurity standards for wireless carriers. That seems like a fairly sensible measure. Why hasn't the agency done that?
It seems incredibly basic, right? Here is a series of very fundamental cybersecurity protections that you should take. And it's a little bit hard to say why the telecoms haven't done it, because whenever you go and ask for comment on something like this, I will always get redirected to sort of the trade body or the trade association of the telecoms industry, which is called CTIA. And I'm always getting statements from them when it's something to do with regulation. And the statements are always saying, you know, we think this gets in the way, we don't want to get in the way of innovation, all of that sort of thing. And then when you get some of the leaked documents I've received over the years as well, I mean, it's clear that it's a money thing. They just don't want to put the money into it. It's going to be very, very expensive to do these sorts of improvements. It's going to be resource and labor intensive. And I presume, to speculate a little bit, but they just don't see that the financial trade-off is worth it. Maybe that would be different if when AT&T loses the call and text metadata of nearly all of its customers, that there is actually some sort of significant financial consequence to that. Because otherwise it just doesn't make sense for them financially, economically, to actually put those measures in place.
I'm asking you this question not just because my call and metadata was part of this, but I think most people know we're exposed, but don't know how to protect ourselves. Short of becoming, your own words, mental about this, how can one do that?
I mean, with phone networks, it's really difficult because the very nature in how they function is that they were basically always on. In your phone, there is something called a baseband, and that is constantly communicating with the cell towers around it to pinpoint its location so it can route text messages. That is why I take the very extreme measure of simply not owning a mobile phone. No baseband, no mobile phone, no problem, at least for me. Again, that is not practical for the vast majority of people. But if you do want to...
I'm going to send you a letter by pigeon.
Please. I mean, that would be a new one. You know, I'd appreciate that. But when it comes to what concrete steps ordinary people can take, more to protect against SIM swapping and sort of those smaller threats against specific people, you can phone up your telco, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, whoever, and talk to them about putting a PIN on your account. It's basically like a PIN number that you would use for, you know, your bank card, your ATM card, but you're doing it for your phone account. So if somebody in the future did call up Verizon and pretending to be you, they would also need that PIN code as well. And, you know, sure, maybe they could find it out, but Probably not. It's the same as putting two-factor authentication on your email, a vital step that will keep out 99% of attackers. I think that is one concrete step that basically everybody should go do if they use a mobile phone.
Joseph Cox, as always, it is completely fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Joseph Cox is a co-founder and investigative reporter for 404 Media. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, and Shayna Roth. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio for Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you like what we're doing here, I want to ask you to join Slate Plus. It is the single best way to support our work. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. All right, we'll be back next week with more episodes. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.